listening to Keeping It Real with Janine, your guide to living an authentic, healthy life. A podcast about living with more joy, energy, and flow. So if you feel your life could be more fulfilling, healthy, and joyful, you're in the right place.
Obesity, depression, autoimmune disorders, cancers, gluten sensitivity, diabetes, endocrine disruption, autism, chronic illness, neurodegenerative diseases. The list is so very long. What's happening and why are we experiencing a huge growth in such a large variety of illnesses, especially chronic illnesses? Many of you have probably not yet heard of glyphosate, the active ingredient in the herbicide Roundup. Roundup was developed to kill the plant it is sprayed on, like weeds. GMO crops are specifically engineered to withstand being sprayed with Roundup. They are considered Roundup ready. Almost everyone has some knowledge of GMOs, but hardly anyone knows that Roundup, glyphosate, is now sprayed on the majority of conventionally grown grains in North America. It's also used as a supposedly safe weed killer by cities and households across North America. This podcast episode is dedicated to understanding how glyphosate is affecting the environment, farm animals, and humans from the perspectives of a well-researched, experienced organic farmer and a well-researched, experienced functional medicine doctor. You'll find fascinating, cutting-edge information that will help you make informed choices in your nutrition and healthcare. We'll begin with how the soil and grains are affected and how they've changed over the last 50, 60 years. David Stelzer is a pioneer of healthy soils and organic foods. His family has farmed in the Pacific Northwest for over 100 years. He's the founder and CEO of Azure Standard, a leading producer and nationwide distributor of natural, organic, and non-GMO foods. And by the way, Azure Standards is one of my favorite places to buy my organic products. David first started farming organically as a teenager in the 1970s, and his passion for providing nourishing, healthful foods grown in healthy soil without the use of harmful chemicals has only continued to grow. Hi, David.
Hi.
I'm so excited to have you on my podcast. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Oh, my pleasure. Happy to be.
Oh, thank you. I'd like, if you don't mind, I do this to all my guests. So I'd like you to begin just by giving us a little bit of whatever you'd like to share of your journey and kind of the path that you've taken to get where you are now. And then we'll get into glyphosate.
Okay. Well, my path started very young in my life. As a very, very young child, I got extremely ill. And mostly an asthmatic type condition, only in a very extreme way. Mm-hmm. And the medical establishment had given me up. They said there wasn't much chance that I would live.
Oh, my goodness.
And my parents wouldn't accept that as an answer. And they began looking in other places for help. Mm-hmm. And so fairly early on in my life, and they finally found a naturopathic doctor up near Spokane that diagnosed what the issue was. But this is several years in. My earliest memories are laying there wheezing on the couch, trying to just figure out if I could catch another breath.
Oh my goodness, how horrible.
So my parents, they kind of were the first pioneers with this. And so this naturopath told them it was primarily an allergy condition. Mm-hmm. And told them that it was the worst dairy allergy and sugar allergy that he'd ever seen in his life. And I still to this day have the very worst of dairy allergies. Mm-hmm. Sugar thing, I stay away from sugar as much as possible, but it doesn't take me down with one bite. Mm-hmm. So anyway, I kind of had to grow up different anyway with this very extreme allergy. And my parents, it started them on this health journey. So they began to understand the difference that it made, because I got well, they started eating differently, health issues that they had got better. My grandpa they spread it to him. He changed his diet. He got well from heart disease that he had. Suddenly, all these things got better. So it became a big thing. And my dad finally says, oh, I'm doing this to ourselves with this soil thing. So he decided, hey, I'm not using chemicals again. And that was in 1973. So this farm, the last time it ever had any sort of a chemical on it was in 1973. So this farm has never had a glyphosate on it a single time. So that's kind of where the health journey started.
What do you grow on your farm?
Well, we grow 85 different things now, but at that time it was primarily, it was a wheat and cattle ranch primarily. Okay. So he did wheat and cows. And so it was, it was pretty mainstream. It was somewhat of a small farm for wheat and cattle at the time. It was about 2,000 acres.
And you're in Oregon, right?
We are. Yeah, we're in Oregon. About 100 miles east of Portland, I tell folks. And, but it said it was basically the first commercial size or larger farm. There were a lot of what we called hippie farms back then that were doing a little bit of organic stuff, but they were all very small gardens, that sort of thing. He was pretty much the first commercial size farm to switch to 100% organic practices. And so basically, I took that on. I was super interested in farming, growing grains, and I actually expanded it into vegetables and fruits and other things early on. But then one year we were farming on contract to a particular company, and we lost that contract after we planted the crop. They came to us, said, I'm sorry, we have to renege on the contract. And so we basically, and I was, 21 years old or something at the time. And so basically we had a choice to either, sue or do something like that, because we did have a contract, or try to pick up the pieces and sell it the best we could. So that's how I got started in natural food marketing, selling our own first crop of grain back in the mid 80s. So it has so I've been involved with organic food marketing ever since. We've sold organic food from a lot of other farmers as well as manufacturers and other people now. And so Azure kind of grew. I was, just running around selling flour and grain out of the back of my pickup as a farmer, to now, we cover like 37 states. So that's my journey, as from a personal perspective.
You definitely turned lemons into lemonade, because you have a fantastic operation there. And I've been ordering, I started with a small private co-op outside of Portland before I moved to British Columbia. So that would have been maybe 2010. And then, and then I found out that I could still order from you and go down to Washington State and pick up orders. So I usually do like 2 really big orders a year. Awesome. And because it's a long process to get down there, but I really rely on the quality and the variety of foods that you provide, and I'm very grateful.
Nice.
So let's get into our topic of glyphosate. So you are going to be the first half of this podcast episode, talking from your expertise as to how glyphosate affects the soils and affects the grains. And then Dr. Matt Flory is going to be talking about how glyphosate affects the human body and the gut microbiome and our health and well-being. So I'm very excited to have you on and to have your expertise. So take it away.
Okay. So maybe we'll start with wheat. Now, wheat has, and glyphosate has a big story in wheat, even though wheat is not genetically modified and sprayed on like corn and soybeans. Mm-hmm. But wheat is obviously, it's been the staff of life. Civilizations have been built on wheat. The Fertile Crescent was completely civilized based on wheat. That was the difference between civilization and the nomadic tribes was wheat. Mm-hmm. It's an amazing thing. There's evidence that humans have been eating wheat for well over 1 million years. We don't know, but we do know that we have modern wheat similar to what we have it now for at least 4,000 to 5,000 years. Mm-hmm. So it's an old staple in the diet. Mm-hmm. Now, right now, we have this huge movement away from wheat. So we're talking, there's books been written, there's a lot of doctors recommending staying away from wheat, and a lot of people tend to get better when they quit eating wheat from various ailments. Mm-hmm. And that's real. So why is this? And this is the question that I'd like to answer a little bit today, is what is the big problem with wheat, with wheat in the diet? And we can go into other crops as well, but let's start with wheat because it's probably the most dramatic of all the crops mm-hmm. in this space.
Well, I've been really puzzled by this myself because humans have been eating wheat for centuries. It seems like all of a sudden, practically everyone is gluten sensitive. Or right. has, all kinds of problems with wheat. And before I knew about glyphosate or, some of the other reasons, I thought, something's going on here. This isn't just a fluke. There's some reason that so many people are having problems with wheat now.
Yeah, no, there's very much a reason, and it's a kind of a double-edged sword. It's a double whammy that wheat took. And so for just a little bit of history on wheat obviously, another thing about wheat, it's of all the food crops that are readily available, excluding a few cactuses and things like that, wheat is the best converter of water of any plant that's widely used for food consumption.
I didn't know that.
So you can grow it in drier areas on less water than pretty much any other crop with definitely than any major food crop, and there's just a few very minor ones that are better converters of water to nutrients.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
So when back in the 50s, there was a group of scientists that said, hey, we're having an exploding population on the earth. We've got to come up with a way to feed this burgeoning population. And the trend was that way. It didn't quite materialize in the way that they expected, but they came up with what they called at the time the Green Revolution. And most of us may have heard of that, historically.
Mm-hmm. So now some of us lived through it.
Some of us lived through it, yeah. So we have the Green Revolution. Well, these scientists, the main crop that they focused on, they did focus on some other crops, but wheat was number one. It was the very first crop and the most focused on crop by these scientists. So, and the way that they were looking to increase yield on wheat, so wheat back, the older varieties, under good agricultural practices, they typically yielded some 30 bushel per acre or something along those lines.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe a little more. You'd see 50 bushel crops from time to time, but that was an amazing, set of circumstances to make that happen. And after World War II, they came up with anhydrous ammonia. Anhydrous is a gas that creates a ready source of nitrogen to a plant. Now, it's 100% artificial, and it has no other nutrients in it, but it has nitrogen.
Mm-hmm.
So nitrogen is the growth regulator of any plant.
Right.
So the more nitrogen you put on, the bigger the plant gets. So they started playing with using anhydrous ammonia on wheat crops to increase yields. And sure enough, it would. But the thing was, it increased the size of the wheat so much that those wheats would grow too tall, and the stem, because it's just nitrogen, didn't have enough of the rest of the minerals to create the cellulose. The wheat would tip over.
Uh-huh.
So it would just fall on the ground. And a lot of times it would crimp the pipe, so it couldn't get any more moisture up the pipe, and it would shrivel the head, and they would get no crop whatsoever if it fell over too early.
Got it.
Which was happening. So they began breeding, and traditionally, this is not genetically modified.
Mm-hmm.
It's through hybridization and traditional breeding practices. They began to try to develop stocky short wheats.
Uh-huh.
So they called those semi-dwarf wheats. Now, they were successful in doing that. They created a variety, and they began to come out in the 60s and 70s, all these semi-dwarf varieties of wheat. And so the farmers then began planting these semi-dwarf varieties, and they began using large amounts of anhydrous ammonia on the crop to increase yield.
Now, just a moment, David, just for my clarification and maybe others, was this being sprayed on or was it being just put in the soil?
Anhydrous, it's a gas. They put it in the soil. They have to actually bubble it into the soil underneath the soil.
Oh, interesting.
So they have these little springs, and you'll see it. I mean, they still do it to this day.
Huh.
In a lot of wheat ground, it's used super readily, and corn as well. But yeah, they have a big gas tank, looks like a big propane tank on the back of a cart they pull behind their tractor. And then they have these little, we call them spring tooths, but they're like curved springs that go in the ground. And then they're in the middle of that, there's a little pipe with emitters, and it emits this gas underneath the soil.
Oh.
And they normally do that right before planting the crop.
Okay. I have seen trucks or tractors or whatever with the big containers on them. I just had no idea what they were for.
Yeah, that's what that is. That's for anhydrous ammonia. And it's so back when they tried to put a little bit of nitrogen on wheat, some of the farmers, they could increase yields a little bit with nitrogen. They might put on 20 pounds of nitrogen per acre. The crop would grow big, they would get a little better yield, and they had a pretty good chance that it would probably stay standing up, or at least most of it.
Mm-hmm.
So, but after the semi-dwarf varieties came in, now you don't have to stop at 20 pounds of nitrogen. In today's world, in the semi-dwarf varieties, they often put on 80 to 100 pounds of nitrogen per acre.
Oh, wow. And that's because the plant's shorter, so it's not going to topple over.
Right. So it's the growth regulator. It pushes a lot of growth early. And because it's semi-dwarf anyway, it genetically won't grow very tall. Then a lot of that growth goes into the fruit, to the fruiting, to the head.
Got it.
Okay. So now we have farmers putting on, and you got to remember, this is one nutrient. For a healthy plant, there's 72 minerals that we know of, 72 different nutrients that fall in. And believe it or not, in a human body, our body needs roughly 72 minerals as well.
And so only one is getting put on it.
Only one is getting put on. It's the growth regulator. All right. So So what happens in a plant that has a lot of anhydrous ammonia or extra nitrogen available to it, it begins to grow really quick off the get-go. So it comes up quick, fast, and early. Now, it shoots up, creates that stalk, puts the grain in. The very first amino acid that develops in grain, in wheat particularly, but pretty much in all grain, is the L-glutamine. So basically, it's the form of protein that is gluten.
Okay.
And the thing is, and that form of protein is also the one that is most readily converted from nitrogen. Very few other proteins will convert from nitrogen, but the gluten will.
So what happens to the other proteins?
You have a completely devoid amino acid chain.
Wow.
It's not there. So they might say, and wheat typically runs anywhere from 9 to 18% protein, depending on the variety and the growing conditions.
Okay.
Now you've got 9 to 18% protein still, but it's all, for the most part, one amino acid. The rest of the amino acid is completely missing. So when our body consumes that, it's out of balance. We need a complex amino acid chain in order to develop healthy, muscles and fiber and in our body that the protein is used for.
Absolutely.
Protein's the building blocks of the body for us or animals or whatever. And when that's a completely devoid amino acid chain, the body already has this huge excess. It doesn't have enough of the other amino acids from other sources to compensate for that amino acid.
So what happens to the L-glutamate then? Do you know, in the body, since it's out of balance and there's way too much of it and we can't use it because our body needs to have the other amino acids, they all work together.
So the body has to throw it off, or it tries to throw it off. And so you tend to think you need to eat more because you're not getting enough protein. And of course the starch is still in the wheat. So hence wheat belly, fat, obesity, etc., that wheat is a big contributor to because it doesn't have the balancing protein that we need for a healthy body. Now we get to the glyphosate. So later, so this is late 80s, early 90s, glyphosate enters the scene in a big way. And most of the wheat that is used for bread, that's not the wheat, that's not here, but most of the wheat that's used for bread is grown in the northern tier of the Midwest. So we're talking the Dakotas, Montana, and the vast majority Canada. All right. So in those areas, wheat, even though it's relatively short season, those are pretty short season areas. They don't have a very long growing season, and they have trouble maturing the wheat all the way out. So traditionally, they went in and they swathed the wheat. In other words, they cut it with a header, and they put it in rows on the ground and let it dry. So because standing up, it was still pulling moisture out of the soil and it was staying wet. And in order for wheat to keep, the moisture content has to be, say, below 11% moisture in the grain. Otherwise, it won't store. It'll get musty or, not taste, You don't want mold in the wheat.
No.
Nobody wants that. So in order for it to keep, you have to get the moisture down to roughly, 11% or lower. So if that, they have to cut it off from its source of pulling moisture out of the ground in order for that to happen.
Mm-hmm.
But it's two times over the field. So they had to go cut it, and then they had to take a combine in, and they have to cut it kind of low. So then they have to run more straw through the combine, and they bring a pickup header, what we call a pickup header. It's like a baler pickup on a combine, and to run the grain through the combine. And it would occasionally pick up a little rock or something like that with it because the stuff's laying on the ground. So they came up with this really bright idea. We can do this better. So what they do now, and started doing and do almost universally now in conventional wheat fields, is that you go in as soon as that wheat is formed in the head and it's ready to start drying down. Instead of swathing it, you go in and you spray glyphosate on the field. And remember, this is wheat that's almost ready to harvest. Mm-hmm. So you go in, you spray the glyphosate on, and the wheat dies. It cuts off the nutrient flow from the root. So it dries standing in the field.
Mm-hmm. Now, is this glyphosate, is it Roundup that's being sprayed, or mostly, is this separated out and in a different carrier?
No, Roundup is the most readily available and the cheapest. So it's just a different dilution of Roundup most of the time.
Okay.
There are other products available, but they're still with the same base.
Okay.
But Roundup is by far the most common.
Mm-hmm.
So you're spraying Roundup right on the crop. And wheat, you got to remember, it thrashes free. It doesn't have a real strong husk.
Right.
There is definitely some husk in it. Mm-hmm. There's chaff. That's what we call it, chaff. Wheat has chaff, and it's really thin. It's like paper. That's what you say. You throw, the chaff blows away in the wind. You winnow the wheat, and the chaff blows away. It's not very big. It's like super thin, way thinner than paper, like tissue paper, kind of thinness. So the chaff is very thin. It doesn't offer a lot of protection when that glyphosate or Roundup is sprayed on that plant.
Great. I was wondering about that, how much of it actually soaks through into the wheat berry.
Quite a bit. And some wheats, you can actually even see the grain. The tip of the grain peeks out of the chaff.
Nice.
As does rye as well. Mm-hmm. Rye is almost completely out. It's kind of just stuck in there. Mm-hmm. It's completely open to the air. And a lot of wheats are as well. They're, different varieties are a little bit different, but there's not a lot of protection. Mm-hmm. So you're pretty much spraying that glyphosate right on the grain.
Mm-hmm.
So now we have a situation where, first of all, you've got grain already that's been pushed with anhydrous to the point where the amino acid chain is completely simple, mostly gluten. Then you put this Roundup on here. Now Roundup in and of itself does not kill plants, nor does glyphosate. Mm-hmm. What it does is it ties up minerals in the soil and in the base of in the root system of the plant. Mm-hmm. So it makes minerals not able to be assimilated, and there's terms for that, but we'll just say it ties them up.
Okay.
So the plant can't absorb the minerals. They call it a form of chelation. Mm-hmm. And so the plant doesn't die from Roundup. It dies from disease. And so there's a very handy disease that's pretty much prevalent everywhere in the plant world. It's called fusarium wilt. Mm-hmm. Now, fusarium wilt is readily available in the soil and the air almost everywhere. So as soon as the plant can no longer take up minerals, and there's one particular mineral that prevents fusarium wilt, and that's manganese. Mm-hmm. Now, when it ties up, so Roundup is specifically designed to go after manganese, tying up manganese. So
Wow.
because the plant immune system absolutely has to have manganese to stay alive from fusarium wilt. So basically what happens is it ties up the manganese in the soil, and it ties up a fair number of other minerals as well, but it's specifically targeted on manganese.
Mm-hmm.
And then the plant dies of fusarium wilt. That's how it works. So now you bring that into the body, the human body.
Mm-hmm.
What is it? What is it doing? So first of all, you've got this incomplete amino acid chain,
Mm-hmm.
super heavy gluten. Now you have a substance that's mixed with that ties up minerals,
Mm-hmm.
specifically designed to tie up minerals.
And it will also tie up minerals in the body then.
Well, it's not really it's the microbiome in the body.
Right.
So that's what it affects. I mean, the human body digestive system in the soil is very similar.
Mm-hmm.
It has to have, we only assimilate our food because of the microbiome.
Right.
Plants only get nutrients because other plants, minerals, volcanic ash, whatever's in the soil is broken down by microbes,
Mm-hmm.
digestive microbes. That's what's in the soil. So in order to keep the manganese from being delivered to the plant, it ties it up at the microbe level.
Mm-hmm.
That's where the tie-up is. So the microbes are similar enough, and yes, it's not designed for human microbiome, but they're similar enough that the microbes then become starved for minerals, and they cannot deliver the minerals to your body that your body needs, especially to create proper proteins
Mm-hmm.
and to be able to digest your food properly. So now you have a double whammy. So you've got to add extra nutrients, minerals, and proteins in order to have, for the body to be able to use that gluten, all that extra gluten, and convert it to muscles and energy.
Mm-hmm.
But now you have the minerals being tied up at the microbiome level in your gut, so you can't digest the minerals that come in your food, the few that you get.
Mm-hmm.
And
so you're probably wasting all the supplements you're taking too, the minerals in the supplements, because your body can't use them.
That's a big part of the whole glyphosate deal, is that, it's tying up the minerals from here to there. So basically with gluten, what happens if that happens long enough, then your body says, this is poison, I can't take it, and it creates an autoimmune response. So we have roughly, right now, 1% of the population of the United States is full-blown celiac.
Wow.
They are absolutely deadly allergic to wheat, right? The
Mm-hmm.
body has created an autoimmune response. Its immune system kicks in, and you get sick as a dog if you eat wheat
Mm-hmm.
in any form, or other, similar grains with any kind of gluten in it, because it sees that glutamine protein complex without the proper complex, or even with it at that point, once you get the autoimmune response, it's going to take some time to build that microbiome back. So somebody with celiac disease, I believe it's curable,
Mm-hmm.
but I think it's going to take some time, and the only way to cure it is through the microbiome. It's through the bacteria.
Right. So do all grains have glutamate in them, L-glutamate?
No.
No, okay.
No, not all grains do. But I believe that there's incomplete proteins and amino acids in other grains as well.
Mm.
I just don't, that's not my research area, because I've been more of a wheat farmer.
Okay.
But there are grains, for instance, rice has no gluten in it at all.
Oh, right. I was thinking more like rye, quinoa. Well, quinoa.
Quinoa does not.
Okay.
Quinoa has no gluten in it. Rye does.
Mm-hmm.
Barley does. Corn has a little bit different kind of gluten. Some people can handle corn gluten when they can't handle wheat gluten.
Mm-hmm.
but their corn also has gluten in it, but it's a slightly different form, and sometimes it'll trick the body. But that huge allergies, corn, you could tell almost the same story with corn, except instead of them using it on it to kill the crop at the end, they create Roundup ready corn so they can kill all the weeds and spray it right on the growing corn crop and kill the weeds underneath the corn. So it's the same substance.
Right. And but that's something most people know about. I mean, most people now know about GMO crops and how they're engineered to be used with Roundup. I've been finding in just asking around, most people have no idea that any non-GMO crop is sprayed with Roundup as a desiccant.
Yeah, that happens, all over in the northern tier. So wheat, barley, oats, peas sometimes, a lot of those kinds of crops this is used on.
From your research, what would you say the percentage of non-organic, let's just go with wheat because that's what so many, we all eat, are sprayed with glyphosate, Roundup, as a desiccant?
No, of course, if it's organic, it's not.
Right.
But so that's definitely one way. But, in the prairies, there's not a lot of space in between the organic field and the conventional one. Mm-hmm. And there's not, so, even with organic, there is slight amounts of glyphosate showing up in organic crops too. We do have to, definitely be aware of that. But it's 100% better than conventional.
Right. I read an article, the farmer asked to be anonymous, but he's a grain farmer in Saskatchewan, and he said that 90% of, and I can't remember now if it's just wheat or grains, are sprayed with glyphosate as a desiccant before they're harvested.
I have no reason to dispute that number.
That aren't organic, of course.
Yeah, of course. I don't know 100%. In Canada, it's probably at least that high. In the U.S., there's certain varieties of wheat. For instance, soft white winter wheats. Mm-hmm. Typically, they don't spray that with Roundup as a desiccant. Now they'll spray the field. It's still loaded with Roundup in a lot of ways because they'll do what they call chem fallow. So they'll spray the whole field with Roundup before they even plant right before they plant the crop. Oh. And sometimes they'll spray it all summer long and just keep it absolutely dead, dry, and desolate. And then they plant into it in the late fall for a winter wheat crop. But they don't spray on top of it right before harvest because the season is long enough that they don't need to, and it's just an added expense.
Got it.
So there's no reason to do it. In the wheat country, right near us here, they use Roundup a lot, but not as a desiccant, not to knock the crop out, because we still have 3 weeks of, usually at wheat harvest, there's a good 3 to 4 weeks of summer left. Mm-hmm. So we've got a little bit of time to spare before the rains come in. Rains don't usually hit here till at least mid-September. Mm-hmm. And usually you're harvesting wheat the last week of July. So you've got the whole month of August as a buffer. Mm-hmm. So there's plenty of time, and it's just an added expense. So most people don't do it. I don't know. I've seen it done on some spring crops and stuff, but it's not the norm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. However, a little further north, it happens everywhere.
Mm-hmm. Got it, because of the shorter season. So what happens to the health of the soil?
Okay, so we talked about glyphosate and the health of the soil. So remember, glyphosate ties up minerals.
Right.
It also, soil microbes is what creates nutrients for plants naturally. Mm-hmm. If you're not putting them on from an artificial source outside, then microbes is what creates that. All energy is created through photosynthesis, right? Mm-hmm. There is the only way life exists on Earth is because there's this little thing called a chlorophyll that converts sunlight and water into sugar. Okay? And that's the miracle of life. If you really, in my opinion, if you get right down to it, if you ever look for the source of life on Earth, that's the place to look. What created the little chlorophyll? Chlorophyll is the basis of all life. Well, chlorophyll, converts sunlight to sugar. Microbes are no different than any other living organism. They have to have an energy source to live.
Okay.
That energy source has to come from sugars of some sort.
Okay.
So in a healthy environment, a healthy plant, if you will, when it's creating, sugar out of its photosynthetic process, it takes its sugar and it delivers it roughly in 4 equal parts to different parts of the plant. So about a quarter of the sugar is used to create root growth, a quarter of it used to create plant growth, a quarter of it used to create seed or fruit, and a quarter of it actually exfoliates out the root system to feed the microbes because it's a symbiotic relationship. Okay?
Got it.
So, and not only is that in your crops, but the weeds do it too. And there's also another little, it's a little microscopic algae that grows in the soil that is the largest producer of sugar for microbes. Well, guess what glyphosate kills?
Probably kills that. Poor little algae.
Kills that poor little algae that creates the bulk of the sugar for the growth of the microbes. So you add in, now you have a less healthy plant because it's being pushed with nitrogen and all that. Well, the first place it's going to cut off, if it's not producing enough sugar, the first cut is the sugar that goes out into the roots. It cuts off the microbes first before it cuts off its own reproduction system. So it gives fruit, even though it no longer gives sugar to the microbes because it's stressed. It doesn't have enough ability to produce sugar because it's unhealthy. It's not a happy plant. So over periods of time, when glyphosate is used, it's tying up these minerals in the soil, and it's, in spite of what Monsanto tries to tell people, its half-life is not fast. It stays in the soil for a long time.
What's a long time?
Many years. Nobody really knows how long it stays in the soil.
Okay.
The answer is not clear-cut. Now, I'm of the strong opinion that it varies primarily based on the microbe level that's present in the soil. So if you're able to introduce microbes back into the soil, because it's hard on microbe population, and if you do, if you look from studies that have been done on what we call plate counts, which is the number of microbes in the soil.
Okay.
In a healthy soil, so you take, roughly a handful of soil, just take a nice big, deep double handful of soil. In that double handful of soil, there should be roughly as many microbes as there are humans on Earth, including the bacteria, the nematodes, the protozoa, everything. So you're talking, you should have plate counts, what we call plate counts. That's the count in that cup of soil of how many bacteria in it. You should have plate counts of around 6 billion for even close to healthy soil. We have seen plate counts in some of the fields under, heavy herbicide use as low as 300.
Oh my goodness. So it sounds like the soil's being murdered. I mean, killed.
It is. It's being slowly tortured and killed.
So
over time.
how can anything grow in it eventually?
Well, it becomes almost hydroponic.
Ah.
And that's exactly what's happening with, with a lot of the soil. It just becomes something to hold the plant up. So now, instead of just adding anhydrous, they have to add other things in their wheat field because the plant won't. So now we're looking at N, P, and K.
Right.
Now, we're having to look at boron. They're having to look at, various things in order to get these crops to grow.
But nitrogen, potassium, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium aren't all the minerals that are needed. I mean, we need, what did you say? Did you say 72?
72 that are known.
So there's 3.
More.
What about all the rest of them?
They're hybriding plants to grow without them. That's the bottom line. So we're creating hybrid plants that don't need the rest of the minerals to grow. The problem is humans and animals can't hybrid that fast to live without those minerals.
So if they don't need those minerals to grow, that means those minerals are also not in the end product of the plant, the grain, the wheat, the barley, whatever.
That's absolutely correct. And that's why we find that people have to supplement their minerals and vitamins. So why are you now you got to take a bunch of pills to get what should be in your food naturally.
Wow.
There should be no reason that everything you need for health is not in your food. That's where we're intended to get it from.
Right.
It should all be there. It's not anymore. So in order to stay even somewhat healthy, we start supplementing. We take minerals out of, other things. Humic shale is a big source of minerals. It's minerals that were absorbed by plants millions of years ago and composted and becomes humic shale. Those are the kinds of places we're pulling our minerals from now, because back then, the plants uptook the minerals like they were supposed to. Now, with modern agriculture practices, not that our plants can't, they're still the same. They haven't changed. They can uptake all of those minerals in a healthy environment. They just don't, because of the reasons we're just talking about. The imbalance, and then, of course, adding in the glyphosate. And, glyphosate is not the only nasty chemical that's being used. It's just the one we happen to be talking about today, and it's probably the worst. A agronomist that I know, a friend that I know that's a leading agronomist, his feeling is, he says, in 50 years from now, our descendants will look back and look at glyphosate the same way we look at DDT today. We just haven't. He says we just haven't found Rachel Carson yet.
So everyone is eating all of these wonderful baked goods and products made from non-organic wheat, and they're getting very little sustenance from it.
Very little sustenance, plus they're getting a little load of glyphosate and way too much gluten. And their body eventually is going to create an autoimmune response.
Right.
And so the key, if you want to prevent that from happening in your life, the key is, number one, move to all organic grains. Grains are probably the most important thing that you can move to an organic. And, we've always heard vegetables and dairy. And nothing against, that's important. Nothing against vegetables and dairy. I eat organic vegetables too. But grain is probably the most important thing.
So if you have to make a choice, maybe because of your financial situation or, there could be a number of factors, the grains, your baked goods, anything made with wheat or barley or rye, you're better off to make sure that those are organic.
I think those are the very most important. They're also the ones that are less expensive to buy than vegetables and dairy in general. And I'm not trying to advocate conventional vegetables in any sense.
Right.
There's glyphosates used in vegetable production too. Mm-hmm. And there are even some genetically modified vegetables now that they can spray that directly on. So, I'm a strong proponent of organic vegetables, but it's even more important in a lot of ways for this exact reason, because the grains are going to do the most damage to the biology or the microbiome that's in your system than these other ones are. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that's the really, really important piece here. How important is it to have a healthy digestive system? So these autoimmune diseases, I believe that it also is a huge contributor to other autoimmune diseases that aren't necessarily celiacs.
Oh, absolutely.
That, and most of those autoimmune diseases start in the digestive system.
Right.
Period.
Right. Obesity, diabetes, all of the autoimmune diseases, whether you're talking about
all the way to
lupus,
Crohn's
Parkinson's, MS, the list is long.
Yeah, and they're all, seriously tied to the microbiome. Mm-hmm. And the microbiome is tied to what we eat in a big way.
So grains that are grown organically, not only do they not have the pesticides, if the soil is treated properly so that it's feeding the plant everything that it needs, the organic grains should have the full complement of amino acids that it should have, and the minerals and everything that the body needs exogenously to process it.
Well, I will say, I'm not going to say that that's absolutely the case always, mm-hmm. because the chances are 100-fold better that it will. Mm-hmm. But it's not a perfect system anyway. Organic only really deals with what's not in the food, not with what's in it.
I never thought of that.
Okay?
Mm-hmm.
So organic, you don't use this, and this. There's nothing saying that you have to use this. You can be organic by default. Now, it's not a very profitable thing to do. So from an economic perspective, not a lot of organic farmers treat their soil that way. Mm-hmm. But by the definition of the rules, you can. Okay, just so I get that out there, I'm a huge organic fan. The locals call me the organic guy. But the definition of organic in and of itself does not guarantee nutrient-rich food.
Okay.
It definitely is a huge step in the right direction, but it's, what we really need to do, and, it's not an easy thing to do, but we really should be selling food based on its nutrient content.
Right.
And I think the future of food will move in that direction. We'll be looking at food based on, how many minerals does this food have in it? How complex is the amino acid chain? And besides amino acid chain, and I know this is probably a whole nother podcast, mm-hmm. but you could talk about the complexity of the sugars. Mm-hmm. So, mm-hmm. A monosaccharide versus a polysaccharide.
Right.
And that is a whole nother study in and of itself. And, we touched on it a little bit with the, the photosynthetic process that creates sugar from, mm-hmm. From plants, but that sugar is not all created equally either.
Right.
So that's probably the first place that we could start a testing program. And, it's not really in place, mm-hmm. but I think mm-hmm. that's the direction that we will be going in the future. We'll be looking at selling nutrient-dense food. What kind of bricks or what kind of sugar content are we looking at in this food? Mm-hmm. And how much of that is simple sugars like fructose and glucose? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And how much are complex mm-hmm. sugars? So again, the more complex the sugar, the more the human microbiome can utilize it. Mm-hmm. And mm-hmm. or that we can actually use it for energy and what we really need to. We eat these simple sugars, it just kicks it to the bloodstream, and we get fun things like diabetes.
Right, right. So, David, to wrap up, what might be, my thought is, so from what you've said, not all organic produce is equal. I can just imagine people listening to this saying, so what can I do? How do I know if my food is nutrient dense or not? Is there people they can call, or are there questions they can ask? How do they know?
Well, partly, a few things that I recommend with organic food. Buy it as much as possible. Buy it from farmers you know. Second best is buy it from companies that you trust to make sure that they're buying it from farmers they know. Avoid cheap imports from overseas, especially places like China. So if you go buy organic food at, say, Walmart or Costco, 99% chance it's imported from somewhere like China or, Chile or someplace like that. Because they can't sell organic food that cheap without it being imported from somewhere like that. Those people are just being forced to do this. They don't have the technology, the organic technology that we have. And they're doing it just by obeying the rules sometimes if there's not fraud involved. They're obeying the rules, possibly the paperwork's in order. But, and I'm not saying it's 100% universal. There's a few good organic farmers in China, but it's the exception, not the rule. And, here organic farmers in the U.S., in order to stay in business, unless they're doing some kind of a triple year scheme, which does happen. There's people that are basically conventional farmers. They'll load their farms up with chemicals and weed control and everything, and then they'll plant alfalfa for 3 years to get it certified to organic. Then they'll plant a couple of grain crops and they'll go back to conventional again, and that's their rotation.
Oh, interesting.
Okay.
Wow.
So it's a way to trick the system. You don't really need a lot of chemicals on alfalfa, and so when they pull out their alfalfa crop, then they'll plant a couple of years of grain. It's really, it's kind of it's one of those ways where what's not in the soil. But good organic farmers that have been in it for a long time, they have learned and they've had to, and the technology is available now to treat your soil right and create nutrient-dense food. And it's really the only way we can stay in business, because a healthy crop is what it's all about. We're not, in order to even get good quality products, we have to have healthy plants. In order to have healthy plants, we have to have healthy microbes. Healthy microbes creates plenty of minerals for the plant to uptake, and we get healthy food. That's kind of that's the cycle.
Right.
So know your farmer. Don't buy cheap imports from companies that don't give a rip about organic. They're just in it for the money, because they can see bigger dollar signs on organic. So, not just picking on those two, but you kind of know who those guys are. The conventional retailers, if you will, that have switched to some organic stuff to try to, put more money in the bottom line, because they're getting the cheapest stuff they can.
Right.
As long as it has paperwork, they don't care.
Yeah. And that's probably pretty easy to get. I didn't realize you deliver to 37 or 38 states now?
We do.
I thought it was just Oregon and Washington. I didn't realize. So maybe you could explain a little bit about how, because it's kind of like an independent organic food distribution network, right? And if people are interested in purchasing some of their food through you, how would they do that? How does this work?
Absolutely. Give us a call. We can do it. We can ship directly to you, but the really cool thing is we have a network of deliveries all over the country, and we send full truckloads of products out and deliver it in local communities. So we call them community drop points. Mm-hmm. So you can get products into your local community wherever you are, mostly all of the United States except the eastern seaboard, say North Virginia and north.
Okay.
You know, we do the Carolinas and then everything west for the most part.
Okay, that's good to know.
Few little holes, but for the most part, everything, you know, west of Virginia. Mm-hmm. Then, so we can put you in touch with a drop in your local community, or you can start your own. That's
what I was going to say. If there isn't anything near you, somebody could decide to start their own drop, right? Absolutely. We love that, do that all the time. And we'd be happy to help you with that. But we'll deliver the organic foods at a regular schedule into your community directly from the warehouse. Never has to sit on a retail shelf, never has to sit and get old, and you never have to wonder where it came from. And also, because there isn't a middle person, I find the prices to be extremely fair. I mean, that's one of the things that I really appreciate about you guys is that I really feel like not only am I purchasing high quality products, but I'm not being overcharged. The prices are very fair. Well, we try to be as fair as we can, and I'm not out here to tell you that you can't find cheaper stuff at Walmart that's organic, but you won't find the same quality. Mm-hmm. I believe we give the best value that we can possibly give. Mm-hmm. So that's our goal, is to give you the very best value. We're not going to cut any corners on anything. We're not going to sell you something that, you know, we're not going to tell you, you know, is imported. You know, we do carry products that are imported, mm-hmm. Even from China, like pumpkin seeds, for instance, but that's the traditional place where pumpkin seeds have always grown. Oh, I didn't know that. Is in China. That's their traditional dish, as are mung beans and adzuki beans. Mm-hmm. So there'll be a few things that we carry, but they're the more traditional things. Mm-hmm. We're not buying cheap imports just because they're cheap imports. Got it. And we'll never do that. We have a relationship with most of the farmers we work with. We work with a lot of farmers around the country. And we do, of course, sell quite a few other branded goods too, to just round out the line, so you can get whatever you want. So you can get pretty much anything you'd find in a natural food supermarket as well. My favorite organic protein bars I get from you. Okay, awesome. Yeah. So what's the best way? How would you prefer that people try to contact you? And I'm also going to put all of this information on the podcast website, but if somebody just wants to jot down a phone number or a web address right now. Yeah. So the phone number here, and give us a call anytime, is 971-200-8350. And the web address is azurestandard.com. That's AZURE standard, STANDARD.com. Great. And I'll have all that information on the website. And David, this has been so enlightening. I'm so grateful that I was actually speaking to one of your customer service people, and she gave me your email address. She thought I should talk to you. So okay. I'm really grateful that the chain of events has connected us and that you've taken the time to do this. I really hope that we can help educate people and change some people's lives. And thank you so much. Well, thank you, and I appreciate your dedication to getting the message out about healthier foods and these agents like glyphosate. Thanks for what you do. Oh, thank you, and thank you so much. You take care. All right, you too.